with you. Sharing. There we are. So tonight we're looking at paper 1, question 3, which paper 1, question 3 is the structure question. And hi Sue, I'd just like to you to think for a second or two about what the structure question is about. I've put here that it's not about the meaning of words. So in no sense is the structure question about the meaning of the language. What is structure to you? So if you think about just structure, if I said, look at the structure of that, whether it's not necessarily just writing, the structure of anything, what are you thinking about?
All the instructional devices like a flashback, flash forward, short sentence, long sentences, and short paragraph, long paragraph, zoom in, zoom out.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, you're thinking there specifically about the structure of a story, which is what we're looking at, obviously, the structure of a piece of writing. But in more general terms, structure, what is the structure of anything? You know, when we think about
how something is organized.
Sorry, go one.
You can go, Monica.
Okay,
Yeah, Monica.
so how something is organized, how it's presented, maybe. I think.
The skeleton of something.
It could be a skeleton. A skeleton of, say, a human being is what provides structure to us. It holds us up. It provides us with shape. It keeps us together. Yeah, that's a very good. That's a very good image, actually, because if you think about what is the skeleton of a story, you know, how is the story held together? How does it relate? How does one part relate to another part? So the structure of anything is how it's put together, how it's built, how it works as a whole in relation to the parts building up to the whole. In a way, it's quite an unusual type of question for GCSE. They only brought it in for this particular curricula, which has only been around for about 10 years or so. Before that, we didn't talk about structure very much. We talked about language. We talked about sentence structure, maybe, but not so much the structure of a piece of writing. And I think some people do still find it a bit alien, this way of talking about a piece of writing in terms of how it is actually put together. It's much easier in some ways to talk about the words, to talk about the language, but that's really looking at it at a different level. So if we just start thinking about the way things are structured, just to give you some idea of what the questions are really trying to get at for you. Got another person waiting out there for me. I'll let them in. So we're going to look at a couple of famous structures very, very quickly. If people keep coming in, beg your pardon. Samaya, did you want to say something?
Yes, I want to talk about the structure.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, that's like you said, that's how the text or story that's building up, and when you look at it,
yes.
And and there is a lot of kind of things that help us to know how the text or story build ups. Like Laila said, short paragraph, long sentence. That's some writer use in 19th century short sentence that the writer use now dialogue, and a lot of flashback and chronology time, a lot of
Yep.
things that
There are lots of
that a
different elements of
a
structure.
lot of
Yes.
structure things.
Yes. And
It doesn't
so,
involve sorry, it doesn't involve we shouldn't mix it with the simile, and we have to focus about structure and don't mix them without
yes,
devices of technique
language. Yes.
language.
So yes. So you're not looking at language structures. You're actually looking at structure techniques. Yes. So you're not looking at language techniques. You're looking at structure techniques or aspects of structures. There are some aspects of structures that all pieces of writing have. All pieces of writing have a beginning, for example, an opening, a start. But there are others which maybe are unique to the particular piece of writing you're looking at. So you've got to be kind of open to what you observe as well. So I mean, here's a very famous structure, the Eiffel Tower in Paris, of course, and very, very obviously you can see that it's built in stages. So a bit like a piece of writing has a beginning, a middle, and an end. The Eiffel Tower has this big first stage, which consists of its four big, strong legs, and gives a platform that the rest of the tower can stand on top of. It obviously is there to give strength and to give access to the building. And then from the next stage is like a miniature version of the one that went before. The legs stand on the platform and give it strength, and so on. Right up to the top, you've got these crosses of steel that the cross shape actually binds it together and gives it more structure and gives it more strength to withhold the wind and the rain and everything. It also gives it flexibility. It moves. It will push and sway in the wind, but it won't break. Now, clearly, the type of structure we're talking about is on one hand different, but on the other hand, it is fundamentally the same. Here, if you were going to talk about the structure of the building, you'd want to talk about its foundations, you'd want to talk about how the stages join together, and what the overall effect of that structure is. If we look at a piece of writing instead, this is a little poem. It's a traditional style of poem called a limerick, and it has a very particular structure. So if you look at this piece of poetry, you might be able to discern what the structure is. So it goes, there was an old drunkard of Devon who died and ascended to heaven. But he cried, this is Hades. There are no naughty ladies, and the pubs are all shut by 11. So that is a limerick. The rules of the structure are all there for you to see. So what do you notice about this in terms of structure? What do you think might hold it together? What its underlying skeleton might be, if we like that. Leela.
The first line and second line, which is Devon, heaven,
Yes.
with the last line 11 is the same. It got the same, what you can say, lyric or something like that. I don't know these things, but
Yeah, it's a
kind of the
sound.
same.
It's a sound,
It
isn't it?
sounds the same. Yeah,
Yeah.
sounds the same. And
So you
Hades
have
and lady.
Evan,
Yeah.
Evan. It's a rhyme. It's what we call rhyme. So
Oh,
Devon, heaven, 11. And so those three lines, 1, 2, and 5, are connected by rhyme. And you're right, also lines 3 and 4 are connected by a different rhyme, Hades and ladies. So you've got if we were doing poetry, which obviously we aren't on this course, but it would be an A, B, B, A structure. And that is a way of holding together a piece of writing that has been used for thousands of years. rhyme is one of the key ways to hold together words, because for whatever reason, we hang on to these sounds in our brain, and so when we hear the same sound, it links them. And there's something very pleasing about the A B B A structure, because that return to the first rhyme almost acts like a little you know, little ending in itself, almost like a punchline to a joke. And of course, the limerick is more or less a joke. The idea that that hell, or the idea that heaven could be like hell because of the absence of naughty ladies and the pubs shutting at 11 o'clock, clearly sort of takes us down from this idea of heaven and hell and the metaphysical future of the persistence of the human soul, just down to basically what this guy enjoys, and the terrible fact that pubs shut early in England, as they used to until about 30 years ago. The ending, all shut by 11, is a bit of a bum bum at the end of the poem. Any other bits of structure though that you're noticing? Rhyme is probably the most obvious. What else? What is it built of? If you just go up one level from words to sentences, what do you notice about the sentences? Bestoon? Did you want to say something, Bestoon? No? Oh. You've got your hand up, Bestoon, but maybe you got your microphone off. I can't hear you. Monica. Somebody speak to me.
Is it a short sentences?
Well, you've got two short sentences. What at
Yes.
3 and 4?
Yeah,
They're
I
shorter than the other ones, aren't they? Yeah.
I think it's like a whole limerick is like one sentence divided by punctuation.
Well, yes, in this case it is. It's all one sentence. Yes.
Yes.
But you've got lines. So a poem has lines. So you've got a long line, and then a line of the same size. Yes.
Yeah.
And then a shorter one, and a long one again. So
Oh
it
yeah,
goes.
so it's a link with the rhymes as well, I think.
That's right.
Yeah.
So you've got long, long, short, short, long, as well as the A, B, B, A rhyme scheme. Yes. There's one more thing to say about it before we move on, because we're not doing poems.
There's a Barbara's one, died and cried.
Oh yes, you've got a nice little internal line, who died but he cried. Yeah, that helps things along a bit. So again, that repetition of the "ide" sound helps to glue it together. Yes, give it cohesion, definitely.
Could it be zooming in as well? You know, zooming
Go on.
to naughty ladies or pop,
Yes, yes.
that's
Interesting. Yes, because in a way, structure does look a little bit at the meaning, at the words, but they don't do it in the same way as when we're looking at when we're exploring the meanings of the words when we're doing language analysis. If you look at the fact that the second line is talking about a man ascending to heaven, and then talking about this is Hades. The idea of heaven and Hades is a reversal, isn't it? He thinks heaven is like hell. Hades is another word for hell.
Yeah.
But the last two lines really go into the details of what, for him, hell would be like. And he thinks that heaven would be lots of naughty ladies and the pubs open all the time. So you can tell that he's a naughty man, with and the idea of looking at this sort of thing about judgment and how your soul will live in heaven or in hell, depending on how you were as a person or whether you sinned, is brought down to the fact that for him, sin, the cavorting with naughty ladies and going off to the pub all the time, for him, that is heaven. And so to him, heaven, in the traditional sense, is Hades, is hell. So there is a kind of a reversal there. So the last thing I'd like to say here, Bestoon, did you want to say anything? Because you got your mic off, and I can't. You got your hand up. No. Is that there is also a rhythm, and you do sometimes get rhythms. If you think about the rule of three, the 1, 2, 3, the bum bum bum, which actually is an attractive way of something to read or to hear said aloud. In poetry, you tend to have really quite extensive uses of rhythm. There was an old drunkard of Devon who died and ascended to heaven. But he cried, "This is Hades. There are no naughty ladies, and the pubs were all shut by 11." So the beat on each of the long lines is the same, and the beats on the two short lines are the same as each other, but they're different. So it's ba 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 ba. If you like. So the use of rhythm is also in this 1, 2, 1, 2 together and 3, and the 2 in the middle being separate. The rhyme, the length of the lines and the rhythm all sort of make it play in the same way, and that means it's a very tight and very strongly cohesive, joined together structure that is very memorable. And the idea, of course, about limericks is that they're not so much things to read or to have read to you. They are things to say when you're in a party, or you're sitting in the pub, or you're having a laugh with friends. So they're things that you want to remember, and because they have this repetitive nature, that they have the beat, they have the rhyme, they have the structure, that actually makes them very memorable, and people can sort of have their favorite limericks stuck away in their memories to share with their mates. And of course, the other thing to say about limericks is, of course, this one is a clean one. Most limericks are extremely dirty, but that's part of the fun of them. So let's move on to how this all sort of goes together with the question paper 1, question 3, the structure question. You've already given me quite a lot of what you know about it. You've got to actually pull apart the way in which the piece of writing is built and put together. But what particular things are you looking for on question 3? What particular things are you looking for in terms of structure?
Opening. Sorry, okay.
You're right, the opening, Bestoon. Yes, good. So basically, the question will always ask you to look for the opening, to look at the opening line or lines. What other part does it make you look for?
Change of focus and ending.
Well, not necessarily the ending, but yes, change of focus. So you're always asked to look at the beginning, the opening, and the change of focus. That's right. But there are, as we've said already tonight, lots of different structural features. And that comes into the third part of the question, which is you picking out a structure feature to talk about, one that you've spotted on your own. Before we move on, though, there are some truths about structure which I think are really important to underline for you. That is, about any type of structure, whether it's the building of a house, the Eiffel Tower, or the short story you're looking at on paper 1. That is that structure is deliberately made. Structure is something that is put in place in order to do a job. You know, it's not random. Structure is the opposite to random. It's there on purpose, and it's made for a purpose to do a particular type of job. That is, we take it deliberately. Sorry, we take it seriously. That's why we have a question on it. You can assume that the way that the piece of writing is put together by the writer is important and is significant, and that's why you're answering a question on it. Just exactly the same as his or her choice of language was deliberate and for a purpose. This one I think is the most important, however. Number 3, structure is made up of parts. If something is a solid, you know, it's just a solid whole, you know, there's only one part of it, it's not really a structure, it's just a thing. Anything that's been built and put together is made up of parts, and therefore you can identify the individual parts that make up the structure. And just as we were saying, the opening is one of those parts. Changes of focus are another of those parts, and so on. And it's finding those parts and talking about them, which is the focus of this question. And these parts are joined together in different ways. And so how the parts fit together and are joined together is also important. Just as a wall is held together by cement and mortar that you put between the lines of bricks, that's what holds it together and gives it, gives it cohesion, gives it structure. But the way you put the bricks together as well is also, you don't put one brick on top of another, you put it slightly to the center so that it covers the gap between the 2 bricks below it. So this structure, the traditional English brick builders structure, gives you immense strength just by putting lines of bricks on top of each other, but you're covering the joins of the line below. And that is clearly a stronger thing than just to have columns of bricks joined together just by the sandy mixture of the mortar. Structure is how it holds together. The other great thing about question 3 then is that it is always the same question. It's not similar, it's always the same question. Right? There is not going to be any variation in it. So you were asked, how has the writer structured the text, or how has the writer used structure to interest you as a reader? It's not going to vary. There's not going to be a trick, you know, like in some of the other questions where sometimes you're agreeing and sometimes you're looking for agreement, sometimes you're looking for differences, sometimes this is always going to be, how is this, does the structure of the text interest you as a reader? So you can go in there with a plan of how to answer this question because you know exactly what it's going to be asking you. The difference is, of course, it will be a different piece of writing every time. And you're applying what you know about structure and what you know about this question to a different text. You've got 3 bullet points, and these bullet points you should follow. It's not the same as some of the other bullet points where it's suggestions. This really does give you a plan of what you should write. So, as Bestoon said, you could write about, and for that you should really say, you should write about what the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning. So the beginning of the text, what is there? What is the writer talking about, showing us right at the beginning of the text? And why? To what effect? Yes. And how and why the writer changes this focus as the source develops. So moving on from the beginning, moving on from one paragraph to another, or maybe even from the beginning of a paragraph to the end of a paragraph, how does the writer change focus? What is that change of focus? And again, how does that interest you? And any other structural feature that interests you. So Remember the rule of the magic number is 3 in AQA. So your first part of your answer, your first paragraph, is going to be about the beginning. The second about a change of focus between one part and another part. And the third one, if you get that far, is going to be about another structure feature that you have noticed that you can identify. Jenny, did you want to say something?
Oh, I'm ever so sorry to interrupt you, Graham. Just a quick question. Are those questions always written in that way on the exam paper? So does it always say that?
Yes, they may change the wording a little tiny bit, but basically
but it is always,
they always are right. They're always asking you, how has the writer structured the text to interest you as a reader?
Yeah.
They don't ask you for doing anything else. It's always for interesting you as a reader. Just to keep it simple. Yeah.
Just to keep it simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Simple.
Yeah. Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah.
Okay. And so you're looking at 3 structure features: the opening, a change of focus, and another that you have identified. That's the most difficult one, maybe, because you actually have to do the work and find one. But you're not looking for 3 because you already know there's going to be a beginning. You already know there's going to be a change of focus. It's the third one that is sort of to show that you're clever enough to pick out another. And it's always about how it interests you as a reader. So there is a bit of a magic bullet here, a bit like I did for language. It's a different one, but basically you take the structure feature, which is, say, the opening. You actually then explain, what does the structure feature do? So in your own words, what does the opening of this particular piece of writing do? And then you say how or why it does that. Explain how that works. So if you say the opening makes you enthusiastic and excited about finding out what's going to happen, then you need to explain why and how that opening is doing that. And then finally, how does that interest the reader? If you do those 3 things for each of the structure features and each of the 3 parts of your answer, then you're going to be on the money for answering the question. So what does it do? And then how does it do that? And then how does that interest the reader? And if the answer is it doesn't, maybe you need to think about what you're explaining. So you can have a kind of a plan like this, really. So what I've done here is I've said in your first paragraph or your first part of the answer, remember, you don't get any marks for how you write it. It doesn't have to be all neatly written like an essay. You can do it in note form as long as you've got it clear and it's there for the examiner to see. But in your first part, you're talking about the opening line or the opening paragraph. Now that is different, obviously. What is the beginning of a piece of writing? Is it the first word? Is it the first sentence? Is it the whole of the first paragraph? Which bit is the opening? Well, actually, any of those can be. The first things you read when you start looking at a story, that's the opening. And if the first 3 words are really, really strong and interesting, then talk about that. If you have to talk about the whole paragraph in order to get something interesting to say, then talk about that. It'll vary depending on what the piece of writing is. But I would usually go for the first sentence or even just the first couple of words. So that's your opening. What does the opening tell us? What does it give to us in your own words? What does it tell us? How does it tell us that? That is explaining how that works in order to give us what we've just said we get from it. So if it gives us a sense of doom, makes us feel unhappy and depressed and sad in some way, if that's what it's doing, tell me how it does that. And then how does that interest you as a reader? Why is it interesting to read a first line or 2 which fill us with doom? It doesn't, obviously it's not going to interest every reader, but you've got to say, I would be interested in that, and say why in some way. Then you move on to talking about changes of focus. Now, I think this is a little ambitious. I would talk about 1 or 2 changes of focus. And I think actually you can talk about 1 change of focus if you like. That is very very simply, let's say the first paragraph talks about the morning. In the morning this happened, in the morning that happened. But in the second paragraph, we're talking about afternoon. Well, clearly the change of focus there is in time, isn't it? Time has moved on. We've gone from the morning to the afternoon. So it's given you a movement in time. That is the change of focus. Anything that's different can be a change of focus. So that is that you would explain what is the change of focus. Some people miss that bit out and they go straight to talking about what's happening with the text without actually explaining what the change of focus is. If it's that we've gone from looking at one character to looking at another character, then please say that. Just be as, because that is the structure feature difference. So if the first paragraph was about Jill and things that Jill did, and then he starts talking about Sam, then clearly we have changed focus from one character to another character. And that is the change of focus. So please say exactly what the change of focus is. So what does that change of focus show us? How do they do that? How do they change that focus? And how does that change of focus interest you? So if it were moving from Jill to Jack, why does moving from one character to another interest you as a reader? It might be building up a feeling of the community that's there. It might be making you see things from different points of view. Whatever it is, you have to identify that. And then finally, one other structure feature. It could be, for example, something that's already been mentioned, flashback. Okay, people mention flashbacks. So a flashback is where you jump back in time in the story to see something that happened before the main part of the story that you're in at the beginning. So maybe you've got some people doing something and then suddenly you jump back in time. Last week we were talking about Rosabelle in her hat shop. Well, that was a perfect example of a flashback because she's there at the bus stop going home in the evening, getting onto the bus, and then she starts thinking about her day. And then we see what happened in the hat shop several hours earlier. That is a flashback. So you would explain what that is. There is an example of a flashback on lines whatever to whatever. And then you would explain what that structure feature is. Actually explain what a flashback is, in particular this flashback, and what it does and how that interests you. What does it give you? Why have a flashback at all? I'm just going to have to let somebody in. Sumaya, did you want to say something? You've got your hand up. Sorry, I didn't notice before.
Yes, please. I want to ask one question about when you say how does it tell us what? That we can here say example about use long paragraph or short sentence or things like that. How?
Well, if the structure feature you want to talk about in 3 is the use of extra long sentences, for example, if that's what you have picked up on and you want to talk about that, then you need to try and explain how that works in order to interest us as a reader. Now, that I think can be difficult But I think I have got an example, not to hand, but there was an example from a text. It was from Frankenstein, and there is a long sentence. I mean, long even by early 19th century standards, in which Frankenstein, who's narrating, trying to tell us how terrified he was of the monster that he's created, and he goes on and on and on and on and on. And by the end of the sentence, if you were reading it aloud, you would be completely out of breath. And what's interesting about that is that it actually gives you a feeling of panic and breathlessness, just like the fear that that the doctor is expressing. This happened, and then that happened, and then this happened, and it gives you that feeling, gives the reader as they read it a feeling of panic because it feels like it's never going to end, and that would be a way of explaining that the use of the extra long sentence there is the writer trying to get the reader feeling like they're breathless and tired out by the end of it, just like Frankenstein is. Yeah. Otherwise, to be honest, I think long sentences, short sentences, often it's hard to actually identify what they're doing in terms of interesting us. Lots of short sentences can give you a feeling of excitement. He sat down, he looked at the door, he heard a shot, a man walked in. Lots of little short sentences like that can feel very busy and jumpy. And if the character in the story is meant to be in an excited state, it can make the reader feel their excitement or their jumpiness. But unless it's something obvious like that, just saying there are long sentences and short sentences doesn't really, in itself, that can be quite hard to explain in a reasonable way. And with this one where you're looking for the other structure feature, you should really be looking for a structure feature that you can explain quickly and effectively. And if it's one that you can't really say anything intelligent about, choose a different one. Yeah. So if there was Jenny.
Sorry, Graham, I have a
Yes.
question.
Oh, sorry, Glenn. So,
Well, Jenny first, then Bestoon.
sorry, yes. So just picking up on what you're saying there. So is it fair to say that, like what you're explaining, Graham, is that we're not describing perhaps the way I'm trying to articulate this. So it's not about the way in which the writer is kind of writing. It is about how I guess they're trying to make us feel. But like you said, putting it into writing. So let me explain that. Sorry. So William Golding, if I remember, I read it a very long time ago. So correct me if I'm wrong. Lord of the Rings, not Lord of the Rings. Sorry.
Lord of the Flies.
Lord of the Flies. That's it.
Yeah.
Here's whilst you were talking and saying that about Frankenstein, I remember in that book, and I could be wrong, it's very descriptive. If I remember, it's very descriptive. So as you were talking, I was thinking, would that be like a structure feature? But then it's really difficult, I guess, if we were to talk about, say, that book, to say that actually the writer is very descriptive, because I'm trying to think, well, how does that make us feel? And I was trying to ask, I guess I'm trying to distinguish between the two as you're saying that, so I can think about how to answer that question. So
where that would come up, say on this one, might be the opening. Let's imagine an opening of a story that gives you lots and lots of details about the place that it's taking place. Let's say it's a jungle, and it gives you lots and lots of details about the trees, the atmosphere. It just gives you. Well, that would be about immediately immersing the reader in the jungle. It makes us feel like we're there. And how does he do that? The writer's done that by giving us lots and lots of individual details about the jungle. So you're not looking at the language, which would obviously be the language question, but you're looking at the fact that he structured it by placing lots of different details, almost like lists of details, and that sort of accumulates in our minds and makes us feel like we're noticing things as we look around.
Yeah,
And
that's
that interests
helpful.
us because
Yeah.
it makes us feel like we're really there with the character in this exciting new place.
Yeah, that's really helpful actually. That helps me think about how I can answer that question when I think of it in that way. Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah,
Bestun,
brilliant.
did you want to
Yeah,
answer?
Graham, sorry, I just want to, I'm a bit confused about the, for each paragraph, do we have to follow PEE paragraph rules for each paragraph?
No, you don't have to follow rules. As I said, you can be more relaxed about how you write the answer, but try and maybe group your answers around the 3 parts of the answer. So it's looking at the opening line, looking at the change of focus, looking at another structure feature. And somewhere in that, you need to say, what is that structure feature? How does it work? And why would that interest you as a reader? So as long as you've covered those things in the way that you have put together your answer, you should tick all the boxes. But you don't have to do it in this skeleton style. It's just my way of trying to explain what you need to do in each part.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Okay. So let's move on. I sent you this opening of a story about Mr. Fisher, but I've got it up on the screen anyway. But so we're looking at the opening. So Mr. Fisher lived alone in a small terraced house in the centre of town. He did not own a car, and therefore preferred to do as much as he could of his weekend marking in the form room after school. Even so, there were usually 2 or 3 stacks of books and papers to take home on the bus. Now, we're going to do part 1. Discuss the opening line and paragraph. What does the opening tell us? How does it do that? How does it interest you as the reader? So let's look at that. What does the opening do? Have a look at it and see what you think. Leela.
This opening just give us, um, introduce more Mr. Fisher to us. Um, by saying, he lived alone, so he hasn't got any partner or children to live, and he how his house it is, how and
So can you boil that down into a general statement?
the writer introducing Mr. Fisher to us in that opening.
Yes, I mean that's the first thing it does. It's introducing a character. It's introducing the major character. Does it just introduce him, or does it give us extra? Monica?
So we learned that he lives alone.
Yeah.
And he loves books.
Where does it give us that he loves books?
Those 3 stacks of books and papers. So
Yeah. I'm sorry. That's what he has to take home to Mark. Those are kids' books to take home to Mark. You see where he says he tries to get as much done of his weekend marking in the form room after school.
Okay.
Even so, he usually has to carry 2 or 3 stacks of books and papers home.
You're showing
That's not my idea of a good time.
Okay, sorry.
You're right.
showing-
He does love books, and you find that out later in the next paragraph or 2.
Okay.
But here we're just looking at it. What does it tell you? What does this stuff about books and marking
Tell
tell you
us
about him?
his job.
He is
Exactly.
He has
teacher.
got
Maybe
marking,
he is
so he is a
teacher.
teacher.
Yes,
Maybe he
exactly.
is teacher, and he can, and it's very, and he is hard worker teacher, because to carry 3 sacks in bus is not easy things.
Yeah, yeah. I remember leaving 2
Even
stacks of books, marked books, in a pub in Gateshead. That was pretty bad. I had to go back and nobody handed in 48 exercise books, did they, by any chance? I did get them back eventually.
Sorry, one
Yeah,
question,
go ahead.
please.
Yeah.
Yeah, when it says that he lives in a small terrace house and he did not own a car,
Yeah.
is it not indicate that he's not rich?
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly, it's not bad. It's not exactly. He's not obviously a pauper. He's not homeless, but it's a small, and he does not own a car. He has to go on the bus. So he's, that does locate him in terms of his income and the way he lives. So if you're putting it into general terms, we've introduced the character. The writer introduces the character and gives us a lot of details about his life. The type of place he lives, what he does, what his job is. He's a teacher. It tells you all that sort of stuff. And it maybe introduces a kind of a loneliness, or he spends his weekend marking. He lives alone. Why is the first thing that we're told about him is that he lives alone? Mr. Fisher lived alone. Those first 4 words, that really, why is that
make
so important? It's there in the
make
first 4 words.
because it makes us sympathetic for him, isn't
Yes,
it?
yes,
Um,
yeah. And that's the
why is
interest,
so
isn't it?
long? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the fact that we're introduced to him, and by the end of just, 3 sentences, we feel like we know quite a lot about him, and we're getting to feel a certain sympathy, or at least empathy for him. Bit boring, bit repetitive. You know, it's he does this every weekend. Yeah, that's the implication. He does as much as he could of his weekend marking. It's not saying on this particular occasion. This is a general statement of what he does and who he is. So he goes on the bus with stacks of books, and he lives to where he lives alone, and we're not being given these details by accident, remember? It's all deliberate. So the writer thinks it's important that we know in the first 2 sentences that he lived alone and he doesn't own a car. Why is the does not own a car so important? Because, as Bestoon suggests, it's about status, isn't it? He might not own a car because he doesn't want to own a car. He might not believe in driving cars. He might be a green warrior. But there's something about putting it there so high profile that it suggests his lack of ownership. Maybe his lack of money, maybe his lack of adventurousness, maybe he wouldn't dare drive on the roads. You don't know, do you? But you can draw quite a lot of conclusions from this. Let's have a look how I've suggested you might attack this. So what does the opening tell us? How does it do that? How does that interest you? So the opening tells us, it introduces the main character, Mr. Fisher, and it tells us about his life and situation. Yes. So in the opening, the writer introduces us to a main character, Mr. Fisher, and tells us about his life and his situation in life. How does it do that? It does that through giving the reader lots of details about his life. And you don't have to give all these examples, but we built up a picture. He's unmarried, he's possibly lonely, lived alone. Not rich, as you said, small terraced house, did not own a car. He's a teacher, weekend marking, and he works hard, 2 or 3 stacks of books. These little quotes are the evidence for making these statements about him. Those are my ideas of what he's like, taken from the text, but these are things which are hinted at, not said out loud. They're not said directly, but you can pick up on these as inferences. but you need to use quotes which you don't analyze or explain, but the quotes are evidence for making those inferences. So if you say that I feel like he's lonely, then you need to put lived alone, or that he works hard, or that he's got a lot of responsibilities. The 2 or 3 stacks of books sort of sums that up, doesn't it? We know he's a teacher because he does weekend marking. Who else does that? And so on. So it's simply putting the details that you've found and what you make of them as a reader alongside the evidence. So remember, he introduces a main character, Mr. Fisher, and tells us about his life and his situation. I feel like he's an unmarried person. Maybe he's lonely, lived alone. I don't think he's rich, he did not own a car. He works as a teacher, weekend marking, and he's got lots of hard work to do that takes up most of his time, 2 or 3 stacks of books. So already you've got probably more than enough to write about in one section. Yeah. And the third thing you have to do, how does that interest you as a reader? Now, it's interesting that they always say, how does it interest you? Not some imaginary reader. It's got to be you. But, this makes me sympathize with the character because I can visualize his life. And I want to read on to see if his life will change in any way. Now, the opening of any story is a bit like the headline of a newspaper. It's meant to make you read on. But you shouldn't just say, this interests the reader to make them read on, because you're not really saying anything special about that particular piece of writing, because all openings should do that. If they don't, it's a failure, because you imagine the opening of a story that makes you want to put the book down and run away. You don't want that, do you? So it's more interesting to say things about how it makes you feel about either the character or the situation or the place. You imagine, wow, there's going to be an adventure happening here, or whatever. Say something which makes the idea that you want to read on explicit. Yes. So I want to read on because I'm interested in seeing whether his life is going to change. Is he going to end up still being lonely, still being poor, still being a teacher? I want to see if he's going to change, because I now sort of care about him. Yeah, that's more interesting than just saying, I want to read on. Why do you want to read on? If you say, I want to read on, why do you want to? And be very specific and link it to the text. So that would be the easiest part of this question, is talking about the opening. It's very straightforward, but you've just got to be very specific. What does the opening tell you? Don't witter on, don't sort of like explain too much. Just say what it does. So what does that opening tell me? It tells me about Mr. Fisher. It tells me he's a teacher. It tells me he's lonely. Boom, that's it. More interestingly, more marks. How does it do that? By giving me lots of details. It tells me this, it tells me that, and with your quotes to show what that is, and then summing up why that would interest you as a reader, because it makes me sympathize with the man as a person, and therefore I'm interested in how he's going to get on in the story, and therefore I want to read on. Really quite straightforward, this bit about the opening, and at the very least everybody can do that bit. It's not hard work, because every piece of writing has an opening. And you should always assume that the piece of writing that you've got in front of you, that first line or first paragraph, is the opening. Even if it's sometimes they give you the middle of a book and it isn't really the opening, it's the opening of that particular section of the writing. So just talk about it as the opening. And it's meant to draw you in as a reader and interest you. Any questions about the opening line and paragraph? Jenny?
Yes. Gwen, can you talk about it in the third party, or do you have to talk about it as a first party in terms of yourself? So can you, for example, because it says, how does this interest you as a reader? But could you say, for example, this interests the reader?
Yeah, of
You
course.
can say that. Yeah,
Yes,
brilliant.
of course.
Yeah.
I think they were just trying to make it as simple as possible by saying
Yeah, it is
you
much
can talk about your own reactions.
Yeah.
But of course,
It
the
is,
problem
yeah.
is, what if you have no reactions? You're sitting in an exam.
Mm.
What if you feel nothing? You can
That's
just
what I was-
imagine what a reader
Yeah.
might find interesting. Yes, of
Yeah.
course.
But I guess it's harder. Well, not harder, but it's a bit more thinking, I suppose, you've got to do if you're doing it as a third
Yeah.
party, because you've got to say, yeah, you've got to change the language. Yeah. But you can do that. Okay, that's
But what
great.
you don't have to do here, which is what I would advise you to do on the language question,
Yeah.
is you don't have to think about potentially a very different reader to yourself. So you don't have to think about, it's a 1903 story, and you're thinking about readers who lived 120 years ago. Think maybe the original reader would have found this exciting, because you don't have to do that. You're just thinking
Okay.
of a typical reader.
Yes. Okay. No, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else about this bit? Anybody wants to say? Anyway, we can come back to it at any point. So that's the opening one, and I think it is the easiest part of this question. Paragraph 2 then is about some changes of focus throughout. Some changes of focus. Now, the bullet point does talk about changes, and so it does lead you to think that maybe you're talking about more than one change. But I would say, as a minimum, you identify 1 or 2 changes of focus. So you should identify the changes of focus. By identify, I mean say what the change of focus is. Don't just say there is a change of focus on line 10. Say what that change of focus is. It has changed from this to this. If you have a change, there must be a beginning before the change and after the change. And so don't leave out the idea of showing what the change is. So identify it and then explain why they are changes. What has changed? Again, you'd be surprised by how many people don't do that. So if it changes from talking about John to talking about Mary, what has changed if you do that, from one paragraph to the next? It's actually that the writer has given you a different perspective. It has taken you from looking at one person to looking at another person. Yes. That may seem so obvious you don't need to say it, but nothing is so obvious you don't have to say it. That's what the change is. So explain that. How do these changes interest you as a reader? So that part's always the same. So if we look at the text again, we've got 2 paragraphs here. This is from slightly later in the text. It had been a disappointing term at St. Oswald's. For most of the boys in 3F, creative writing was on a par with country dancing and food technology. Oh, he tried to engage their interest, but books just didn't seem to kindle the same enthusiasm as they had in the old days. Mr. Fisher remembered a time, surely not so long ago, when books were golden, when imagination soared, when the world was filled with stories which ran like gazelles and pounced like tigers and exploded like rockets, illuminating minds and hearts. He had seen it happen, had seen whole classes swept away in the fever. In those days, there were heroes, there were dragons and dinosaurs, there were space adventures and soldiers and fortune and giant apes. In those days, thought Mr. Fisher, we dreamed in colour, though films were in black and white, and good always triumphed in the end. Now, there are things which are the same, and there are things which are different here. What would you say is the change of focus between that paragraph and the second paragraph? Now, in order to do that, you need to actually say what each paragraph is focusing on. Monica?
So we have flashback in the second paragraph when Mr. Fisher thinking about the past, how books were
Okay, so how is that a change?
desired. Is a change because it's in the first paragraph he's writing about how his students behave and what is their interest today, and book but book just didn't seem to kindle the same enthusiasm as they had, and he changed into the time not so long ago when the books were golden.
Okay, that's good. Yes, so he's talking about the disappointing now. Now is disappointing for Mr. Fisher because the boys don't seem to love the books like they did. Then in the second paragraph, it takes us on a journey into the past, yes, where Mr. Fisher remembers when the boys were, totally consumed by the books, when the books were exciting and amazing and adventurous and wonderful. And so that's the major change in focus, isn't it? Between him feeling that, the books just don't seem to affect the boys at all, and then back in time where they obviously are affected and they were totally consumed by them. Is there any other type of change of focus here? Is there anything else happening between the two? Yes, go ahead.
It's me. Okay, so in the first paragraph he uses more simple language suitable to the interest of the book, but on the second paragraph when he's talking about how it was in the past, the language is more sophisticated. He uses lots of lovely vocabulary, try to encourage our imagination to see the boys, generally students who illuminating minds and hearts. So he uses these kind of phrases,
so we need to be
not present in the first paragraph.
I mean, you're absolutely right, but we need to be careful not to get into language feature territory. But you're right that the language definitely changes. Could we talk about that in a slightly different way? Sumaya?
I talk and and I want to add something that he is feeling disappointed as well because he tried to engage the boys maybe with books and give them books, and they did, but the unlucky the boys they wasn't interested at all with the and
so
that makes
remember
me feel,
we're looking at focus, change of focus, not looking at this of the telling of the story. It's something slightly different, but you are right to pick out that this first paragraph is about disappointment.
Yes,
and it's the present
sadness
because he feels sad because that he tried to help the boys, and the quote we can say try to engage their interest. That's the quote.
And the second paragraph is about just this incredible rush.
Golden time that's for him, and golden time that's golden days for him.
It's about enthusiasm. I mean, if you just want to boil it down to, it's about his disappointment and then looking into the past when things were wonderful. Try and state it in simpler terms. Otherwise, you get too bogged down in the details. Separate it out, and then you can move on to talk about the why and the how in the second part. So, yeah, there are different ways of looking at this. There is another major change of focus here, and that is where we are now. Imagine if this was a film and you were looking through the camera, and what would you be looking at? Now, clearly, we're looking at Mr. Fisher probably sitting there looking grumpy, looking disappointed, looking in their writing and feeling that everything's pointless. Whereas for the second paragraph, where are we?
We are in a past now, and everything is glooming and very like you said, is
Yeah,
everything is in rush, and
you're right. We are in the past, but how do we get there? How
but
do we
by
get to the past?
flashback, by
Yeah,
flash.
but where is this located, this past? We haven't gone on a time journey like in a
Like,
science fiction.
sorry, we are in Mr. Fisher imagination.
Exactly. We're in his memories. Mr. Fisher remembered a time. It is literally, we've gone inside his mind. Yes. So that's a major change of focus from seeing him looking grumpy over his books to moving into his time, moving. Yes, you're right. It's a flashback. We're going back in time, but we're going back through his memories, his amazing, happy, golden memories. And so imagine doing that in a film. How would you show it? And of course, the writer can just flip from one thing to the other, and our imaginations fill in the rest. Try and capture what you think is actually happening there. We're seeing the world through his memories, and his memories, of course, are infused with his feelings. So his disappointment in the first, and then the wonder, the amazement, the excitement of the second is in his memory. It's
Could
in
we
his
say zoom into his mind?
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah. And it's even a kind of like an effect, and you could imagine going into his mind, and now we're seeing all these things like gazelles and tigers and rockets and giant apes, and I mean, just look at the things which are mentioned. There. Anyway, let's work it through. Explain why these are changes. So the first two paragraphs focus on Mr. Fisher's life as a teacher and introduce the fact that he's unhappy that the boys have lost interest in reading. Paragraph 3 changes to show what reading should be like: exciting, amazing, and wonderful. We dreamed in color is the little quote. You can go for the golden. There are so many, So it is about a change in feeling in Mr. Fisher and the focus on the reading. How do those changes interest you as a reader? We are shown why Mr. Fisher is sad and lacks interest in his work. He looks back to a time when he felt introducing books and reading to his pupils is exciting and life-changing. But that has changed in modern times. This takes meaning away from his life. We can feel sad for Mr. Fisher and connect to him as readers. I want to read on and see if he will find happiness and meaning in his life. Or really, also, will he recapture those lost times, those amazing times? So it's about maybe clearing some of this away and thinking, how does the writer's change produce the meaning that we're taking from it, without starting to talk about the words, really. So from being disappointed and sad to being, just so excited. Another way it does that is through having these, you were talking about long sentences. It had been a disappointing term at St. Oswald's. Okay, he tried to engage their interest. Very straightforward, very, as you said, low level kind of language. It's still quite well written, but you then have these long sentences full of subclauses. Mr. Fisher remembered the time, surely not so long ago, when books were golden, when imagination soared, when the world was filled with stories which ran like gazelles and pouncing tigers and exploded like rockets, illuminating minds and hearts. And that use of these long, segmented sentences, full of subclauses, full of imagery, is obviously major contrast between the two paragraphs. He's just bringing to life all the amazing content of those stories. But that would be another language feature. That isn't about changing focus as much as this use of lists, of listing the content of his imagination. This use of listing is a structure feature in itself, and he does it twice. You've got all that stuff about the gazelles and the rockets, and he does it again. In those days, there were heroes, there were dragons and dinosaurs, there were space adventures. Why these breathless lists? That would be, for your third part, another language, another structure feature, using long sentences full of lists of details that build up and almost leave us breathless with excitement. So how does it interest you as a reader? Well, one of the key focuses here is I want to see if his life is going to return to that happiness. Will he discover something that's going to bring him meaning and happiness again? Or is it going to be he's just going to carry on being depressed and sad? Which builds on the empathy that you got from the opening. So if we look at any other structure feature, discuss one other structure feature, identify the structure feature, explain it, say why it interests you. Well, there are lots of different things you can look for. Any patterns, anything that you think stands out because it repeats or it builds through the text. Chronology. Chronology simply means time order or the logic of time. And we've already identified a flashback. So Mr. Fisher has a flashback. Yes, it's just him thinking about the past in his mind, but we go on a journey inside his mind to the past. And so that is a decent flashback. It's not as literal a flashback as the one where Rosabelle goes back in time and we see what happened in the hat shop earlier that day. It's more of a set of feelings and images about the past, whereas with hers it was a real, the reader goes from being in the bus to being in the hat shop. So flashbacks can be more suggested, or they can actually be literally, we're just going to jump back in time and tell a bit of the story from earlier in the chronology. Chronology is the buzzword when talking about flashbacks, because that's the way that time moves forward. You can actually stop time, you can freeze and just analyze what's going on, in great length, one particular moment in time. Or things can move forward quickly. Things can go backwards. Things can jump back or even jump forward, a flash forward. Much more unusual to suddenly see something that's going to happen in the future. But it does sometimes happen. Just to remind us of what's to come, that maybe the characters aren't aware of, but we are being made aware of in order to build tension and suspense. Where the story starts is also an element of chronology. Not all stories start at the beginning, right? Some of the oldest stories that we have don't start at the beginning of the chronology. So Homer's Odyssey, from 800 BC, it starts in the middle. So it starts in the middle, things have already happened, and then it kind of goes back to the beginning, and then it continues from the beginning to the middle, and then goes on to the end. And in some ways that actually is good for creating tension, because we get it right into the action. We know we see the character, we see what's happening, but we don't quite know all the answers to the questions. We don't know who the character is and why they're doing what they're doing, and we gradually learn that. So it's a technique that's been used by writers for thousands of years to maybe start at the end or start at the beginning, start at the middle. Another really important one is dialogue or conversation. That's where you hear the actual characters speaking to each other. You know, in quote marks, you know, he said, she said, sorts of conversations. That is a very big difference in structure. So in Mr. Fisher, it's all narrative. You know, we are being told what's going on, what we can see, what Mr. Fisher feels, what he's thinking about. But sometimes a story will explode into 2 or 3 or more characters just talking to each other. The pace of the writing slows down, and we're really then looking at in real time at conversational speed how people are responding to each other. It's a very, you know, a lot of books are almost entirely made up of conversations because it's real people, in inverted commas, real people. It's characters talking to each other, and we learn who they are, how they feel about each other, what's going on through the things they say and how they say them. It interests the reader because it actually allows you to feel like you're really there watching and listening, and you can get to know the characters through what they say to each other. Oh, right. I know that these two have got they've got some past. You know, you don't have to be told that there's a difficulty between them, because I can hear there's a difficulty between them in the things they're saying to each other. So actually, that's a favorite one of the examiners, to have, you know, a story where you got some description, and then you get a short break of characters talking to each other. That dialogue or conversation is a major structure feature. Now, it's not part of the opening usually, and it's not part of the change of focus, although moving from narrative to conversation is a change of focus. I would leave it for the third thing, which is talking about another language feature. This story has an example of a dialogue sequence, or it has characters talking to each other. What does that tell you? And why does that interest you? Changing narrative perspective. Perspective is the point of view that you're being told the story from. Narrative is the way the story is being told. And you know the different types of narrative. So usually the two that are most often used are talking about I did this, I did that, which is called first person. Jenny? Jenny, do you want to say something?
No, did I? Oh, sorry, no, I pressed it by mistake.
That's all
Sorry.
right. That's all right. So you get stories which are told from one person's point of view. You get stories which are told from a general point of view, maybe the writer's point of view, maybe from some sort of godlike figure that's above the action. We call the omniscient narrator. Just, you know, she walked along the road, she did this, Jenny thought that, where the narrator actually knows everything and can see everything and tells us the story. But there are also pieces of writing where those things are mixed up. So let's say we've got a narrative voice which is telling us about the characters and where they are, and then suddenly we're inside one of their minds and hearing what they're thinking. You know, oh, I'm so unhappy today, and so on. That would be a changing narrative perspective, and that is very strong as a structure feature, because suddenly hearing what one of the characters is thinking, seeing the world through their eyes, is a very different move, and it will affect the reader quite a lot. And so you can say quite a lot about that. There was in your books, if you there was an astonishing piece. I can't remember who wrote it now, but basically there was somebody's having a picnic a man and a woman, and they've got a bottle of champagne, and they're in the middle of a field, and then some people start running towards them as if they're going to attack them. And all of that you're seeing from the point of view of the man remembering. He's there in the picnic looking at these men running towards him. And then it says, and suddenly I was 30 foot above, looking through the eyes of a hawk that was hovering above the scene. Now, that's a really weird thing to do. And if a writer does something like that, then it deserves to get commented on. Because 1 second, the character was in the middle of something, and you are looking at the world through his eyes and feeling these men running towards them and the danger that he's in. The next line, he's suddenly above everything, looking down, almost like a god looking down at the earth, but specifically through the eyes of a hawk. Now, you can't change more than that. That is changing from thinking and looking through a man having an experience to suddenly seeing things through the eyes of a hawk looking down. Again, interesting choice to do that. I'm not entirely certain myself why the writer would have done that, but pick up on something like that and say that's an amazing change of perspective. It's a total change of narrative perspective, and you could then conjecture, put forward your own views as to why you think the writer has done that. There are no right and wrong answers on that one, as long as you argue your point. You think that's really interests me as a reader because it does this, it does that. It makes me see the scene as if that person has now gone up into the sky and is looking down. Maybe like he's disassociating from what was happening to himself at an earlier stage in his life. How does that make me feel? It's that's the sort of thing you can do. One feature that every piece of writing has, and Bestoon mentioned this earlier, is the end. Every piece of writing you're given to look at will have an ending, just as it has a beginning. And you can always, if you cannot see any other feature, if you just are having I just can't see one, and I've got to move on to my next question anyway. This is only worth 8 marks. How am I going to get those marks? Well, if in doubt, write about the ending. You wrote about the opening, write about the ending. You can't be wrong. Another feature, another structure feature is the ending of the sequence of the set of the sequence, or the ending of this piece. Again, it doesn't in reality mean that it is the ending. You are never going to be given a whole story, so there will be a continuation, but they will have chosen a piece that has a definite beginning and a definite end. And so that ending is the end of the sequence. If it's the end, what is the end doing? Yeah. So what does the ending do? Does it leave me sort of on a cliffhanger, which means, from the old days when they had films and, some guy would be, he's fallen out of a train and he's hanging onto the edge of a cliff. And then it goes, next week, we'll find out what happens to him. And you think, oh no, I need to know now. And people will come back to see it because he's literally hanging from a cliff. And that's a way of making the reader want to turn the page and read the next chapter, because wow, the danger, the anxiety, the excitement I'm feeling for what's going on. So does it leave it like that? Another very common thing that endings do is that they become circular. So the bit at the end of the sequence in some ways reminds you of the beginning. It takes you back in some way, maybe directly to remind you about what you learned at the beginning and put it into context, or it could do it in an ironic way, which shows you that things have changed. And then you say, so Jen, you just look at what the ending does and what it tells you, explain how it works, and then say how it interests you as a reader. So if you're not finding these things, if you're not talking about all these clever tricks and bits, don't worry, just talk about the ending. It may not be the best thing that you can do, but it's something you can do. You know, if you're just running out of time for this question, you think, all right, I can write 2 or 3 sentences about the ending, and you know, you will pick up points for that. Features, actually finding the structure features like flashbacks and conversation. If there isn't a flashback, there probably will be conversation. There probably won't be both, you know. But patterns as well. For example, colors. So it might mention the bit about Rosabelle in the hat shop. It started with her holding the violet flowers, which obviously have introduce you to a color. Later on, you have the red-haired girl. You have the green hat, you know, as green. Her eyes as green as the ribbon, and so on. Lots of colors all the way through the text. Why? Does this reference to color join the story together and so on? It could be about time, just mentions of time. Begins in the morning, moves on to the afternoon, moves on to the evening, and then ends at night. That is structure. That is simple structure. It's taking you through the day. Or you might be moving through space. You might be moving through actual physical space. People start inside the house, then they open the door and they walk into the outside. That is one change of focus. And then they get into their car and they drive away. They've now completed an entire move from inside the house to driving down the road. That is a structure feature. It's movement through space. So you identify a feature, a structure feature, and you say as accurately as you can what that is. Now, structure is not like language. It hasn't been something that people have talked about since Aristotle, you know, thousands of years ago. There aren't lots and lots of jargon. You can kind of say it in your own words if you like, and you can use the language of film if you want to. That's quite appropriate. Like you said, focus, zooming in, flashback, and so on. The sort of language we use when we're talking about movies and television. But let's, in this case, I say the third paragraph or from line whatever, you know, so identify where it is in the text is a flashback. So you say exactly what it is. It's a flashback to a happier golden age in Mr. Fisher's life, to a time when young people found reading the most exciting thing there was. So that's identifying the feature and very briefly saying what it is. Explain it. This is important as it shows why Mr. Fisher is sad in the present day and explains to us what he considers important and seems to have been lost from his life. There is a massive contrast between the past, when reading exploded like rockets, and now when he sits gloomy with no real expectation of change. So the explanation shows what the writer is doing with the flashback. Why is it there? Not just that he's taking us into the past, but what is he? Why did he? Sorry, in this case, why did she do that? Yes. So you're talking about the choices that the writer made. You're not talking about what the characters are doing. You're not talking about, you know, so make sure that with structure, it's always about what the writer has done when doing these structural things. And why does that interest you as a reader? It helps the reader to understand what is happening in Mr. Fisher's life. It makes the reader sympathize with him. It doesn't just tell us what has changed, it shows us. And then at the end, when he begins to get excited reading Tippett's work, we connect back to this flashback and can guess what is happening, that this boy has rediscovered the joy of reading that has been missing for so long. So this question is about the whole of the text that you've got in front of you. So you can actually, although you're talking about the flashback, you can connect it with the beginning and the end if you want to, and show its place in the story. But you can be quite simple about it. It helps the reader to understand Mr. Fisher's life. It makes us sympathize with him. It shows us what he's lost. You know, the use of the everything that it tells us about, all that lovely language, it just makes us feel what he felt about books and stories and the way that the kids got into them back then. So I'd like to look at another example in closer, and I sent this text to you. It's from a novel. It's the opening of a novel by Graham Greene, and it's about it's about criminals in gangs in Brighton before the Second World War. And so we have this character called Collie Kibber, whose job it is to go through seaside towns during the summer holidays, where there are lots of people there on holiday. He works for a newspaper, and basically he dresses up as this character, Collie Kibber. That's not his real name, whose name is Hale, but he dresses up as this guy from the newspaper, and he walks around. Now, the idea is that if you've seen him in the paper, you might recognize him that day on the beach, and you go up to him with your copy of the paper and you say, "Excuse me, you are Collie Kibber, and I claim my prize." It was like a game. It's very similar to the ones where local radio stations might phone up a certain number. And if you actually have that radio station on your radio when they phone you, they ask you a question and you can win a prize. If you don't have that station on, they won't, you've lost, you don't get the chance. But it's a way of sort of making you tune into their radio station. The Collie Kibber thing was a way of making you buy that local newspaper and then carry it around with you all day, just in case you see Collie Kibber running down the street. But of course, we also find out that there are other reasons why there are other things going on in Collie Kibber's life, in Hale's life, that make what he's doing distinctly dodgy and dangerous for him. Because this character on the front of the cover, Pinky, is a 16-year-old thug who runs a gang of older men, and Hale owes him money, and because he did some illegal gambling with him, and now he owes them and is trying to get away without paying. Pinky is a sadist. He likes to inflict pain. He likes to hurt people, and that's the main point of the story. It's Pinky's story. It's not Mr. Hale's story. So let's have a look at that. I'm going to come out of this and look at the actual piece of writing I sent you, which I have reorganized in order to show the features.
Sorry, Gillian, I didn't
Yep.
get that.
You didn't get it?
No, sorry.
I thought I'd sent it out to everybody, but I will send it to you afterwards. Don't worry, because I'm going to show it to you anyway. So basically, I've taken the extract that was used in an exam, and but I've reshaped it to fit with the parts of the structure question. So here's the opening, and then I'm thinking about, well, how does this opening interest you as a reader? So Hale knew before he had been in Brighton 3 hours that they meant to murder him. With his inky fingers and his bitten nails, his manner cynical and nervous, anybody could tell he didn't belong to the early summer sun, the cool Whitsun wind off the sea, the holiday crowd. Now, I think with this opening, the opening line is so strong that you could simply talk about the first sentence. You can talk about the whole paragraph if you want to, but I think for the point of the opening here, this one is very strong. What can you say about that opening line? What does the opening line give you?
straight away said, you know, someone gonna murder him. That's alarming the reader already, and they wanted to know what happened and why and how.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. But just stick with the what does it tell you? What does it actually give you, that opening line? Let's break it down. What does it introduce you to? Stella?
The writer used a strong sentence to introduce the main character,
Mm-hmm.
what he's going to face, and the horrible situation that he's about to find himself.
Yes, absolutely. It gives you
And he
one more
just
thing that you haven't mentioned.
he just arrived there in he's just 3 hours in here.
Yeah, it tells you where he is and how long he's been there. You know, I mean, I know that's just a factual thing, but it introduces the character of Hale. Stella, do you want to say anything more?
No.
No, you were quite right though. It introduces Hale. It introduces a main character. We don't know. We haven't read the rest of the story that he isn't a main character and he's going to be dead by the next chapter. Sorry, spoiler alert. But he's going to be dead by the next chapter, and he isn't really a main character. He's just the main character of this chapter. But yeah, but it introduces a character. It tells us where he is, Brighton. It tells us how long he's been there. He's only been there 3 hours, so he's just arrived. We don't know where he's come from, or who he is, or what he is at this moment. But there he is, and then weirdly, in the third part of the sentence. Yeah, because Hale knew before he had been to Brighton 3 hours that they meant to murder him. We don't know who they are. We don't know why they want to murder him. But it tells us that he knew that they meant to murder him. And that couldn't be stronger, could it, for a story? And why does that interest a reader?
We wanted to know who those people are. We wanted to explore more to find those people and the reason they wanted to kill him.
Those are perfectly
It's
good things to want to know. Bestu?
Yeah, I just want to mention, we just want to read on just to know whether he's going to be murdered or not.
Yeah. I think predominant in my mind is, are they going to murder him? They meant to murder him, but are they going to murder? Am I going to see a murder? Is Hale, who I'm just being introduced to on the very first line, and in the very first line, there's this possibility that he's going to get murdered. So first and foremost, is he going to be murdered? It's probably secondary. Who are they? And then why? Yeah, those are the key things here, aren't they? But first and foremost, surely is he going to be murdered? So we can understand maybe that he is. That is a lot of stress. You know, that's a terrible situation to be in, as you said, Leela. Yeah. Now the rest of the paragraph gives us
One more thing,
information.
Jan.
Yeah. Go on.
So one more thing. We just want to know what he has done actually.
Oh yeah, but that's part of the why, isn't it? So why do they want to murder him? Has he done something to deserve being murdered? You know, is he a naughty man? Or is he an innocent victim? Who knows? Yes, so we want to know all these things. And at the moment, of course, we know nothing. If you wanted to do the whole paragraph as the opening, and I think that gives you a lot more to write about, but I think you've got way enough just in that first line, that first sentence. It gives us details about him. Inky fingers and bitten nails, cynical manner, nervous, didn't belong. Yeah. So that's just a series of visual clues about who he is and how he's feeling. And what can we tell from those? You know, we know that we got nervous, not belonging. His bitten nails says stress, doesn't it? Anxiety, fear. And of course, all of that goes along with there are a bunch of people who might want to murder him. The inky fingers bit doesn't fit, does it? What does inky fingers tell us?
That he write. He used the ink to write. He's right.
Maybe he's a writer. Now, what we're going to find out later on, much later on, is that he is this Collie Kibber character, and he carries pamphlets and leaflets to put out, you know, with clues about where he's going to be and so on. So he's got written material that, and the ink comes off on his fingers. But it's interesting that he just drops that bit in there with his inky fingers and his bitten nails. Somehow the inky, I mean, I'm getting off into language analysis now, but it's part of the detail about the character. So some of the bits don't make sense yet. Other bits do. Bitten nails and nervous and didn't belong certainly goes along with the meant to murder him. You know, the contrast between the lovely early summer sun and the nice being down there by the seaside with the holiday crowd. He doesn't belong. Why? Because he alone of all the people in Brighton on that morning, he's worried about being murdered. And so we want to find out what's going to happen to him. Is he going to be murdered? Why is he going to be murdered? Who's chasing him? What's going to happen? Yeah. Really an easy bunch of marks to get for that first part of the answer. So a change of focus then between the first paragraph and the second paragraph. They came in by train from Victoria every 5 minutes, rocked down Queen's Road, standing on the tops of the little local trams, stepped off in bewildered multitudes into fresh and glittering air. The new silver paint sparkled on the piers. The cream houses ran away into the west like a pale Victorian watercolour. A race in miniature motors, a band playing, flower gardens in bloom below the front, an aeroplane advertising something for the health in pale vanishing clouds across the sky. Okay, don't worry about all that language. That was in question 2. Yeah, that's the language question 1. We're doing question 3, structure. What is the change of focus between the first paragraph and that second paragraph? Put it into a nutshell. What is the main change of focus?
Shall I talk about it?
Yes, please.
Talking, it changed our focus from the hail to the people coming for the holiday over there.
Yes.
And that place.
Yeah, Brighton. Yes, Brighton by the south coast. Yeah, one of Britain's still one of Britain's greatest seaside resorts. Yeah.
It is. Yeah.
So yes, exactly. It couldn't be easier as a change of focus. We've moved from a very close focus on Hale right down to his fingernails. You know, like a focus in on his fingernails. Nothing else, just Hale. Suddenly, we're now looking down on Brighton, not even seeing individual people, just crowds of people, and what Brighton is like on a lovely holiday morning. We might imagine the camera zooming back away from Hale up into the sky, helicopter shot across the whole of the town as you see the people swarming out of the stations, getting onto the buses and trams and zooming off down to the prom. It's almost strange to give us this stark image of a man who's going to be killed. And all we can see is him. And then suddenly we've lost him. He's gone. It's not so much a change of focus to Brighton and the people. It's also a complete loss of Hale. Where's Hale? We've just been introduced to him. We've just been told he's going to be murdered, maybe. And now, second paragraph, where is he? He's disappeared into the crowd. He's gone. And that's kind of frustrating. I want to know about hail. Why are you telling me about what a lovely place Brighton is on, and all those other people? He's lost. He's gone in the crowd. And that, in a way, is a frustration that builds suspense, that makes us feel, wow, I've lost him. Where is he? Where is he? I want to find Hale again. Yeah. And that might be one of the effects of this change of focus. It sets the scene. It tells you what their surroundings are like. It tells you that it's massively crowded. It does all that, but it also stops mentioning Hale, having only just introduced him. That's weirdly, it's what it isn't focusing on, which is more important than what it is focusing on in this particular case. You see, you have to be flexible with this question and respond to what's there and what you can see, rather than trying to fit everything into a set response. There are lots of changes of focus. I don't want to overdo that. Let's have an interesting structure feature. Well, looking at this line, it says, this was Hale's job, to keep doing his duty until a challenger released him, in every seaside town in turn. Yesterday, Southend, today, Brighton, tomorrow. Now, the structure feature that I've picked out here is simply this sentence. I say it's an interesting example of a structure feature. What is interesting about this sentence as a sentence? Leela?
In here,
timing.
Go ahead.
in here, talk about where he was yesterday, where he is today, but tomorrow didn't set any plan, or it left it blank, and that's maybe going to tell us he maybe murdered by them.
Okay, so that you're already into analyzing what the structure feature is and why it works. What would you say the structure feature actually is? If you wanted to put a label on it.
Chronological.
Well, it is about the chronology. You're definitely right. But as a sentence, what's different about it? Did you say, Bestoon?
I said,
hanging?
You said timing. Like, for
It's about
example,
timing.
Yeah.
But why is this a different sentence? Why is this different to all the other sentences in the piece of writing?
It is a cliffhanger, isn't it?
Definitely a cliffhanger. But still, regardless of the content of the sentence, why is it different? What doesn't it do? Every sentence.
Didn't finish. It didn't finish.
Isn't. Exactly.
Finish.
Yeah. So try and keep it simple. Just identify what the what the structure feature is. It's an unfinished sentence. Yeah. Then you can get into what the unfinished sentence does and what the effect of it is. But first of all, identify it. It's an unfinished sentence. Now, most of the examples of text you're going to get in exams don't have one. It's very unusual. Occasionally it comes up. More usual is that you'll have a line where it's maybe just one or two words, like help me, just by itself. Anything that does that, where you've got one sentence that sits on its own, it isn't part of a paragraph. It it ends with a ... or a hyphen, as this one does, or it it just seems to not be grammatical in some way. It trails off. That's lovely as a structure feature because it's obviously important. It's meant to draw your eye in, and you can then give your own opinions as to what the writer was trying to do with it. Yeah, but try and label it. In this case, it's an unfinished sentence, or a sentence that doesn't end, or a sentence that doesn't have a full stop. There's obviously a missing word there because he might be murdered. He doesn't know if he's going to be anywhere tomorrow. And it's just a reminder. All the stuff that's gone before about him running around Brighton, doing this, doing that, suddenly the writer has decided to draw us up and remind us of that first line. Yesterday, Southend. Today, Brighton. Tomorrow. And that silence at the end speaks volumes. Oh yes, he might be murdered. There might not be a tomorrow. And it just puts you back into the suspense and tension of the murder mystery that hasn't happened yet and may never happen. But yeah. But don't get confused between what the structure feature is and what it does. Those are separate things. It's like, this is a simile. Now explain what the simile is doing. There's a difference between those two steps. So this is an unfinished sentence. What does the unfinished sentence do? How does that affect you as a reader? Those are different steps. Don't get ahead of yourself. Try and identify what the structure feature is. He's given us a sentence that has no ending. Yeah. Another interesting one is let's look at the ending. Okay, the ending. So another interesting structure feature, or a structure feature that interests me, the ending. Nobody paid any attention to Hale. No one seemed to be carrying a messenger. That's the name of his newspaper. He deposited one of his cards carefully on top of a little basket and moved on, with his bitten nails and his inky fingers, alone. Now, what's the bit of the ending that really affects the reader? I mean,
feature.
Yeah, it's the alone. As an ending, what is this? What is this bit doing at the end? Bitten nails and his inky fingers alone.
Sorry, the bitten nail and inky finger mentioned in the beginning of the text.
Exactly.
So circle.
Well done. Circular. Yeah, it's circular ending. This ending takes you right back to the beginning, when in the second sentence it tells you about his bitten nail. It tells you about inky nails and inky fingers and bitten nails. Yeah. It reminds us of the beginning. And what, of course, does it say at the beginning? He might be murdered. So although he's just doing his bits and pieces of his job, nobody's got a message, nobody's got one of the newspapers, he puts one of his cards down, and then he wanders off, and we zoom straight in to those bitten nails and inky fingers to remind us that he's still the same man from the first line who is going possibly to be murdered. And then that very last word, alone. It reminds us of how vulnerable he is. You're going to be murdered, and now you're at the end all on your own. At the end of the day, because time has moved on, it's now nighttime. It starts at the beginning is in the morning, and this is nighttime, and he's on his own in the dark, alone. Boom. That's a nasty ending for a sequence, because the very next thing that's going to happen is that Pinky's going to emerge from the shadows and slit his throat and throw him into the sea. But you don't need that to know that's alone, ringing like a funeral bell. Alone. But that would be language, and we're not doing language at the moment. But the important thing here is the ending is circular. It returns us to the beginning paragraph, where the reminder of the fact that he's going to be murdered is. It brings us right back to that fact. So it's circular. It links. You can use those words. It's circular, takes us back to the beginning. It links to the beginning. Bitten nails, inky fingers. That's your quote to prove it. It's there in the last line. It's there in the second line, and so on. And just saying how that interests you is that it's the tension. It's the fear. It's the, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? It's like, everything that's happened, but now we're alone. He's alone in the dark. What's going to happen next, and so on. Okay. So, I mean, you might want to have a look at that and see if you can see any of the other things in there. One of the things you might have noticed as we look through this is that some of the words are bold. And I went through and bolded 3 hours, 5 minutes, 11 till 12, 10 till 11, 12 till 1, 1 and 2. Yesterday, today, tomorrow. All of these things are to do with time, clock struck 11, and so on. All of these things to do with time. So time itself is a structure feature. The chronology, as you say, we're constantly being reminded of the time. Tick, tick, tick. Yeah. Why might that be appropriate for this story? That it's time moving forward all the way. Wherever Hale goes, there's a clock. Wherever he goes, he's got a timetable that tells him he has to be there by this time, and there by that time, and there by the next time. Why might that be appropriate to this story, to this character's story?
To mention that that stress that is it gonna go time second by second or hour by hour reach that time to be murdered.
That's right. And what is the time ticking away to? His fate, his doom. Yeah. So if he's only got so many hours left, time is running out. And it's you've surely seen films or TV shows where the camera keeps going back to the clock. It shows the time ticking away. It builds up tension. It shows us that something's going to happen when we get to a particular time. It's a cheap trick, actually. But
Graham,
again, yeah, go ahead, speak.
Graham is kind of foreshadowing.
Definitely. It is definitely. Constantly mentioning time. It reminds us constantly that he is running out of time, that his life is controlled by time, and especially that line about yesterday, tomorrow, and so on, that time is running out for him. And when you link that with the idea of being murdered, it's his mortality, it's his date with fate, and so on. Anyway, that's the ending tonight. I mean, the main thing I want you to take away from what we've been talking about is be flexible and observant. You're going to look at the opening. It can just be the first few words or the first line. You don't have to go for the whole of the paragraph for the opening. Then you're going to look at a change of focus between one or two paragraphs. Say what that change is. Identify the change. Yeah. And then if you can't find a fancy thing like an unfinished sentence or a flashback or a pattern, you can always do the ending. Okay. And say what the structure is, and then explain it, and then say what the effect on the reader is. Monica, did you want to say something?
Sorry, no, I only.
That's all right.
Shadowing. Right. Sorry, I didn't switch off the.
Has anybody got anything they want to ask or add? Sumaya?
Yes, please. Just I want to ask if we find this structure, example, flashback, and we have to write what the effect of the reader and why it's there and how they use it, and we pick some quotes.
Yes.
Like evidence, and that's the third step, that we see the effect the reader depends on the story. And example, if we find other structure like dialogue or conversation, and we have to do the same.
Yes, but remember in your third in your third part of where it says find another structure feature that interests you, I would say if there's a flashback, talk about the flashback, because it's obviously been chosen. They expect you to talk about it.
Yes.
And then it's what you choose to say about it. First of all, identify it. There is a flashback from line 11 to line 20. You don't have to quote the whole flashback, right? And then it's about what does that flashback do? What does it tell us? And then how does it affect us? Because if the writer has written a flashback, they must have done it for a good set of reasons. Yeah. Likewise, if you might be lucky and get a piece which has got lots of different ones that keep jumping out at you. Try and use the one you think you've got something interesting to say.
Okay. And what you say and what you can write about it and what you learn about it.
Yes, it's what does it actually do to us? What is it giving us? Is it giving us information that helps us build the characters? Is it filling in a part of the story to help it make sense to us? And then why is that exciting or interesting to read? So when it was the flashback to the hat shop, it filled in all the blanks about why Rosabelle bought the flowers and went without her tea, because she wanted some small luxury to make up for the fact that she couldn't afford that expensive hat. Yeah, it fills in the blanks. It makes it more complete. And that's kind of interesting to do it that way round, to see the effect on her later on before we find out why. It builds a certain tension, and so that we want to see it revealed. Leela, did you have something you wanted to say?
Do we get, on top of that video, do we get the PowerPoint as well for today? Because I see that really.
Yes. Now, I did think about that the other day. Yeah, I think what I'll do is I'll go through when I put up the film, the video. I'll put in the PowerPoints for each of the weeks as well, because that'll
That
help,
would be
won't it?
great.
That
Yeah,
will help. Yeah,
that would be. Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah.
help you make sense of it, and maybe the handouts, if there are any handouts. Yeah, I'll try and see if I can do that.
Thank you.
Okay, if you haven't got anything burning to say, I'm going to close the meeting. If you want to ask questions, please just get in touch and ask. A couple of people have sent me things to look at and to comment on, and I'm happy with that as well. So, Monica, did you have something?
Yes, I would like to ask, because so if we are writing about the structure, so should we give the quotation or not really?
You do need examples from the text as evidence, but that can be, what the writer does on line 17. You don't need to, and therefore you don't need to quote. You're not analyzing language, so it could be a little quote, because that might be quicker. But, he uses lots of details. Well, give an example of a detail.
Okay.
Yeah. But you don't need to go into the detail of the language. So if you were talking about a flashback, it might be from line 16 to line 32. You don't need to quote it.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
All right. Anybody else got any questions? Stick them in an email and ask me. Okay. And
thank you, Grail.
Next week
thank you very much.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Yes,
Next week I'm going to be
Thank you so
around.
much for your session.
Yeah. Okay. Next week is going to be a revision session on paper 1. Okay.
Oh, brilliant.
All the
Thank
best
you.
then.
Have a good
Bye,
evening.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.